It's Gary Erickson of Erickson G Architects, and today we're going to talk about town planning and urban planning by default. It's number 6 of Architecture and Planning Drawing Series, How to Draw Like an Architect. Today we're going to review 4 drawings, 2 schemes, and we're going to look at town planning. Really fascinating subject, so important today. And later on, just so you can stay a bit to the end, we're going to talk about theory a little more. We're going to talk about theoretical issues in the town planning idea. And it's going to get kind of conceptual, all right? Now, usually architects wouldn't get into this kind of detail because we're really not supposed to. You know, to a great extent, we're just selling an idea, but we don't get into the why. We just get into the how, not so much the why. It would be a challenge because you'd start to uncover some uncomfortable truths about things in the planning world if you got into the why. So let's go. Now here we have Sandstone BC. Now this is a beautiful location in BC, a beautiful undeveloped landscape. You see a sketch, it's in pretty colors. You see the 3/4 view looking down at the landscape. New town. Now, every urban scheme has a certain flavor. My job, as the artist here, is to create that flavor, to interpret the culture and ask myself, well, what do these people want to see? What do they see their town being? What do they want it to look like? So I'm going to go to the next slide, and it's going to be down on the ground. And this is where the feeling really comes across, because people have to see themselves in the space, happy, comfortable. It's like home, but exciting, a little exciting, but not too exciting, because it's BC. Now, BC architecture, there's prototypes. There's many prototypes. I went to university at UBC, and we studied a lot of these. And when you live in BC for a while, I was there about 5 years, you see them all. And I've been to the island, Vancouver, of course, too. And there's a kind of a stucco lightness to things because they don't have a lot of brick. It's mostly stucco. So it's a lighter, glassier, more transparent expression. Why? Because it's raining all the time. And if you don't get light in, it's going to be pretty sad. And I mean seasonal affective disorder type sad. So that's the environment. Now, the big overhangs, well, it's like raining all the time. So you need rain protection. When you walk down the street, the more continuous, the better. And the scale, smaller, like a village. Really, a village in the forest is seen as the ideal. So when people want to move somewhere, they want to live in a village, they want those intimate connections, and you see them in the rendering. People walking around, interacting. Now, there's, of course, retail, because a lot of the money from this comes from retailers. On the left was signage and some stores, little fashion. And on the right, offices and residential. It's a mix, right? Sometimes a roof expression of a little restaurant or club. Now, of course, all these things don't happen usually in the same place at once, but this is more of a fabrication, just to represent things in this urban scheme, which, you know, it's large. Now, today, I want to say a little bit about how these things are done. Now, this very rarely you get this kind of like drawing going on. Today, things are done with computers, as we all know. This is a bit of, you know, wasn't really that even done when I was doing it, because I was a little bit of outside the system. They hired me just to give a special illustrative flair, but it doesn't happen too often. These things are now done so well with software. There's a software called Cities that I was looking at today where you can program a whole city in 3 hours. Okay, what used to take us a long time to draw, now it's just a matter of dragging and dropping things from a palette. You just, oh, here's my beautiful roads, my fantastic airport, my highways, my trees, my buildings. Oh yeah. And the quality difference between this and real urban planning, you know, it's a bit of a challenge. It's a challenge to the profession when incredibly smart teenagers can whip out a city no time. And I think it's exciting, especially when you think about AI and the way that information could get imported into city planning, and so many options can just happen using software like Python, where you bring information. It's a great new world of urban planning. I'm really looking forward to looking at it with you later on. But this is a more traditional approach, and it's softer. I might even sketch over some AI-derived massing. I don't care. Or just make it up myself like I've done here, to soften it so it doesn't look so hard and so machine-like. But really, this kind of hand drawing, I don't think it's going to be around very much. Especially when now down on the ground renderings, they usually don't even look this watercolor. Typically, they're starting to look more machine-like too. People are getting used to it. But back here, when I did this in the early 2000s, late 90s, it was the gold standard. People wanted to see their schemes watercolor, watercolor. This really isn't watercolor, this is Photoshop. But it's done with a watercolor-inspired palette and a watercolor-inspired techniques. And I just fake Photoshop to look like watercolor, much easier. And the line drawing is just pens as usual, my normal thing. Works great. So that is Sandstone. Now let's go to the next one. Now the next one's going to be a bit of a shock. This is done in the desert. This is the Middle Eastern design. This is a really fascinating project that's like a ship in the sea. Only it's a building development in an ocean of sand. And really there's not a lot around here. This is an idea where you can create a working town, where you can have everything in one spot, and people would drive for miles around to come to here as a destination. In the back, you've got these big domes. That's for entertainment, leisure. Maybe there's skiing, I don't know, typical water sports, just passive landscape. You can hang out in the cool air where it's baking outside, right? And then the browner buildings, those are residential towers, and the blue, kind of icy looking gray blue, it looks like waves, those are commercial towers. And you see roads going in and out. That's because underneath there's parking and a retail mall that goes through the whole thing. So this is actually like a piece of a city, but it's floating in the desert. And this is what it looks like when it's done by genius computer artists. They take my idea and then they create computer art with it. This took me about 6 hours, a week. Okay, so that's kind of the ratio as usual. But of course, they had to build everything, and then Photoshop it. And I mean, it's a more technical process. So that's it. Now, you want what it looks like down there? Didn't have to sketch it because we had the models. So this is the entrance. Although I had to give direction in terms of this canopy, the geodesics. I had to elevate everything in CAD and, all that so they can do it. Because they have to have a pattern to go by. It's not a simple matter of just making things up. Custom design, custom CAD to do it. So this ice in the desert building in the background, nicely done, nicely done. So that's the flavor of the entry part. And if you want to get on top of the podium and look at where you're going to be living, there's your unit in a shaded balcony. And below, swimming pools, of course. It is hot. In the distance, your fantastic dome, and not a hint of a dust storm out there. It's a pretty blue sky. So that's what it looks like in the desert. It's in the UAE, either Saudi or the UAE. I can't give it away where it's actually at, but I don't even know if it was actually built, because this was before 2008 and the whole market went downsized. So that's the two renderings. There's one sandstone and the next a desert project. They're both town planning schemes in a way. The desert project, not integrated in the landscape. It's really quite separate, of course, because it's difficult to become a desert type planning and have it integrated with sand. Sand just blows everywhere. You have to keep it out. You have big walls for that. So you have a tendency to feel like in a castle. or in a walled city. Whereas you're in the nature in BC, you want to be outside. You might have a raincoat on, but you'll be walking around in the beautiful air, beautiful temperature. Okay, so it's totally contrasted that way. Let's go back to the sketch. So if you're going to compare and contrast these two, these are two totally different civilizations. When an urban planning scheme is interesting and a town planning scheme is interesting because it's a step up from architecture. We looked at a couple of buildings and sketches how to draw a building. We looked at a complex like an airport, which is a number of buildings together. And now we've gone up and saying, what do these groups of buildings look as a human gathering, as a community is a word for it, or just a larger scale of development, form of development. We're coming out of privately owned things into a world of government, into a world of government control. And that's what some people have a hard time talking about. It's talking about the politics of planning, talking about the state and the control of the state over our lives. I hate to break it to you, but our lives are controlled by the state. And as an architect, and especially in Canada, I'm in between the state, you, me, and private corporations. Private corporations would hire me to prettify, and I mean like make pretty, these schemes and sell them to you. You all know that. The government knows that. I'm implicit in that, because we're all implicit in the state in some way. We all buy and sell things, and I'm here to sell a development scheme to you enabled by the state. So let's get that out of the way. When I present these, and I do present these sometimes, very rarely, it's usually done by a professional presenter, I have to sell it to you. Now, as an urban citizen myself, I'm skeptical. I'm skeptical sometimes of what I'm selling to people, and so should you be. But on the other side, without development, well, where would we be? I mean, we'd be back in Stone Age. We'd be running around without clothes on trying to hunt squirrels. It's all about people coming together, living together in a community, working, living, playing together, as they say in the brochures, the real estate brochures. And all that, there's money. At the bottom line, there's always money to pay for it all. And you know who pays for it? Us. We pay for everything, although you won't hear it put that way, but of course we do. Who else do you think is going to pay for this? In a complex web of shell game of costs, we're all paying for it, and I defy you to actually find out what that flow is going to be. It's difficult. Developers are in there, the government's in there, the banks are in there, and we are really just along for the ride. What Vancouver is different is because it's way on the left of the scale, and I mean far left. People are on the left coast or the west coast, the left coast, so they feel they have a say. They have a strong say in the way their town looks, on the way their city is. That's why those people look so happening and friendly and walking around and get on a bike, and how great that is because they think of themselves as a village in the forest. A lot more freedom, a lot more say. The state plays that back in many ways to them, and architects on the West Coast spend a lot of time with people talking about their storage, their issues, what they want. So when they see this presentation, they're not against it. They love it, and they want it, and they want to live there. But I'm going to explain to you there's both good and bad to these things, positive and negative. The positive side to having a big state, left coast, highly planned vision, is that it's expensive. Is that those trees got to be planted, those water features have to be maintained, all that costs money. And it's good for the people that live there, it's good for the owners. It seems ideal, like a utopia. But as every utopia is, there's always a downside to a utopia. The downside is, who's paying for those costs and what is the price of that payment? On the left coast, typically those costs are paid sometimes by foreign money that comes in and buys out real estate. Because it's the closest city to Asia, there's money inflows. So that enables a socialist regime. So you don't have to, but shh, don't talk about it. Because we're not supposed to know. We're just going to love it. Because we're getting paid for. But we don't own it. We don't control it. You see, that's the issue. We're being used as a kind of a trophy property sometimes to hide money. To create places for money to go. Where does that money come from? Not our problem. So there's a moral issue with that. Definitely a moral issue with that. Also, is everybody going to live in this beautiful city? Are we going to live in this beautiful city? Are we be able to afford it? Because real estate on the West Coast is really expensive. And it's expensive because all those wonderful amenities that are given to you. They're not given to you. You're paying for them. And if you can't pay for them, guess what? You gotta go. And that's the negative side. The cost of property tax is huge. The cost of real estate is beyond reach. It's one of the most expensive cities in the world. And this kind of land use is not highly dense. So the cost per square foot is high. There's not a lot of sharing going on here, right? It's not a middle class city, is it? It's low and it's high. The middle, not so good. These people have families. Do these people have personal lives? These people do anything but pay property tax all the time? I don't think so. But there's another story. It's a place in transition between a village and a city. The positive side is it's not, as we call, a shithole. It's not going to go down into that nasty place where places go when they're badly kept and people aren't paying taxes, they're unemployed. That's the downside. The good side is it's not going to go there, but we don't know if we're going to be able to make it. I can't afford to live there anymore. I went to school there, worked there, but it's way out of my means. I have to be here in middle-class city Toronto, which relatively speaking is cheaper, believe it or not. That's changing. So, let's go. Let's go to the desert city. What is the government like? Well, I would say this is a kingdom. And this is the right side of the spectrum. This is a highly conservative Islamic state. So this is really a different expression. I wouldn't be presenting to citizens here. I wouldn't be doing the presenting, of course, because the presentation is going to be done by a local or by a highly trained person who may know the language, of course, and should. And their discussions are going to be a little different because we have a top-down government. It's statist, of course, with the capital S. Those people are a lot smaller, and we don't really care if there's a smile on their face. They're just walking by as shadows. And it's really about the real estate. Wow, look at the money I'm spending on this. I can afford to hire rendering artists now. And it's a whole different flavor. It looks like glamour. It's more high-tech. It's more money. Less community. A lot of these are for expats. A lot of you people are Westerners who come for tax-free or tax-less employment and spend a lot of it in the actual compounds, because what else are you going to do for 5 years, right? You're going to stock it all the way. And this would be the upper class of those groups, because they're all, of course, stratified. It's a stratified society. There's locals who own it, who are born into it as a traditional monarchical system. It's very hierarchical. And there are those travelers, the expats who come in, who are status is highly differentiated depending on whether they're doing the labor to build it or they're doing the professional work to control that labor, or they're there to help the royal family verify their power and their influence over their land. Whatever it is, it's stratified. So maybe the taxes aren't as high because this area of the world has crazy resources. I don't have to talk about it even. But it's a different look. It's like a jewel, right? But how could you afford this in BC? Maybe not. In a way, some of these things could be tropical, but because the density is high, why wouldn't you have high density? What are you worried about blocking the view? There's no view. There's just desert view. Desert's gorgeous, but still, you don't have to look at it that much. You really want to be in the dome. You want to be in that nice dome, maybe hanging out, having a cocktail, or having, giving kids some ice cream. I don't know. Whatever it is, it's going to be pretty, but it's a little more right-inspired in some ways. Not always, because it's Islamic State, so there's going to be a socialist type control over expression. It's not free expression. But not at all. Probably one of the most controlled societies we have. Does it look controlling? Those are pretty strict grids there. Grids are controlling. Now we're doing it because it's quick. I mean, we've got to whip this stuff out. All this work is done quickly. And the rendering artists really appreciate when things are modular. This design is there so you can take a line and whip around text mapping, and it looks like, wow, it's not square, it's round like a dune. So there's some clever tricks here. Anyways, let's go back to square one, our leftist coast. Thank you for coming today. Next time, I'm going to keep it a secret. We're going to see what we're going to do next. I'm going to look at all that work. I've got thousands of these. And we're going to take a look at something new. Thanks for coming. Thanks. Bye.